What's the secret to making change happen in civic life? Thinking and acting in networks, so you can generate power that grows exponentially. Let's find out how.
Let us now make our voices heard. I pledge to serve and to push my country. I pledge to live like a citizen.
Welcome to Citizen University TV. I'm Eric Liu. On this show, we're exploring strategies of citizen power and how you can make change happen. Over the course of the show, we look at different strategies in the categories of changing the game of power, changing the story of power, and changing the equation of power. Today, we're going to dive deep into one of these about changing the equation that we call acting exponentially. What do we mean by acting exponentially? Well, to back up a second, when I say change the equation, I mean this. There are so many people who think about power in civic life as a finite zero-sum thing. I don't have power, other folks have power, I can't change that. And one of the most basic things we've got to do, both as a matter of mindset and action, is to remember that power is positive sum. You can generate new power out of thin air, and you do so in part by acting exponentially. What we mean by that is three things. In the first place, setting off contagions, viral contagions of an idea or action that lead other people to change the way they behave. Secondly, activating nodes in a network and thinking about those nodes as things that you can touch and move and send forth. And finally, creating networks and an approach to network localism, which I'll describe in a moment. These three elements are core to what it means to act exponentially. Let's dive deep into each one of them. So setting off contagions, here's what we mean first. Remember, one of the most basic laws of civic life is that society becomes how you behave. Your actions, your omissions, your choices, your behaviors are incredibly contagious. They set off incredible cascades of mimicry, whether good or bad. That's one of the most basic features of civic life. And when you think about setting off contagions, what you realize is that at any moment, any of us, through a simple deed, through a particular meme, can start changing the way that people around us see what's possible in politics. A couple of vivid examples of this. One is called Giving Tuesday. So Giving Tuesday started back in 2012 as a project out of the 92nd Street Y in New York City. And they were recognizing that the few days after Thanksgiving, Black Friday and now Cyber Monday, were days that were so completely in thrall to commercialism. And they thought, what if we took another one of those days after Thanksgiving and repurposed it? And so they chose to make Tuesday after Thanksgiving a day of generosity, a day of supporting nonprofits and social causes. And with a simple hashtag, Giving Tuesday, and just 100 days to prepare, when they cooked up this idea, they put this idea out there. They sent this out into creating a wave and a network of behavior change. And what happened was remarkable. In a very short time, in that first year, they managed to raise over $10 million through Giving Tuesday. Now, every year since then, that number has more than doubled. And just last year, that number was close to $170 million activated worldwide through a simple hashtag. And what made that hashtag fly was the values, the spirit of invitation, the idea that generosity itself could be a viral meme, and setting off a contagion of generosity was as simple as launching a hashtag like this. Now, another more recent example is hashtag #MeToo, or just the broader campaign on social media, Facebook and Twitter in particular, called #MeToo. And this is a campaign that began in response to the incredible stories about Harvey Weinstein and his acts and alleged acts of sexual harassment and assault. And what #MeToo became was a simple storytelling campaign in which women initially, but now people of all genders, started saying, I too have been a victim of sexual harassment and sexual assault. This has happened to me too, and I'm not going to remain silent. And it may have been recent, it may have been a long time ago, but by putting my story out there, I'm going to create a spirit of contagious courage where others can actually put their stories out there, and we can begin to shift the norms, that this stuff shouldn't be happening in shame, in silence, or in the shadows, but that we should be naming it. And the #MeToo campaign has spread in a way that is completely contagious. Again, not because there was some person in command of a central machinery, but because there was a spirit of invitation and a viral notion that actually unlocked this capacity for courage. That's what it means to set off these kinds of contagions. Well, the second dimension of acting exponentially is activating nodes. If you want to think about networks and reading a network map, it's not just throwing memes out there and hoping they'll land somewhere and catch fire. It's identifying that map of a network the way an epidemiologist might, thinking about, who are the key nodes who can really broadcast out a message? Who are the folks, if you want to think about this as a public health matter, who are the folks who spread behavior, disease? It could be gun violence, it could be AIDS, it could be obesity, or it could be compassion, whatever it might be. Who are the folks, particularly in the network, who are heavy influencers and who spread these ideas? Well, there are a couple of examples of the way in which activating these nodes is really key to our work of acting exponentially. So think about one is Uber and other ride-sharing services like this. So Uber itself, of course, and these companies operate on the principle that they can cut out the middleman. They can disaggregate taxi companies, for instance, and through network technologies, reach out to this incredible, nearly infinite array of individual atomized drivers who can, on a moment's notice, be activated and pulled into the network to deliver a ride. Well, that platform that works for Uber, it turns out, also works for the drivers of these ride-sharing companies. And they've come to realize that, hey, even though we're isolated and atomized, we too can use a network. And we too, particularly if we organize in nodes and activate the most connected and influential among us, can actually pull together to demand better working conditions, to demand better treatment, to demand better wages and a better share of the profits of these companies. And so that whole process of activating nodes in this new sharing economy is something to watch closely. Another example of this node activation is the phenomenon of TEDx. Now, most of us know about TED Talks and the big annual event that TED holds. It's a giant, exclusive, very expensive gathering that's held in Vancouver every year. And only a handful of us can actually ever go to TED, the mothership event. But what the organizers of TED realized was they didn't have to just traffic in that kind of exclusivity and scarcity. That if they created a platform, which they decided to call TEDx, and invited people all around the country who were nodes of their own networks in their own localities and communities to use the same template of TED and to organize their own TED-like gatherings, that they could spread this brand, spread this idea, and spread this approach to spreading great ideas. And so TEDx now has opened that network in a way that is incredibly powerful and that is spread through these conscious choices of activating nodes. That's a key part of our work here. So finally then, the third dimension of acting exponentially is creating networks. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean in particular thinking about how we act locally at all times in civic life. All citizenship is local. And yet, because of technology and because of our times, local action is webbed up immediately to other people who are acting locally. So you're able to scale your ideas not upwards, but sideways by going from point to point and taking an idea, for instance, like a $15 minimum wage, or particularly a law around gun access, or perhaps a law around family leave or paid medical leave. And you can take these ideas that get developed in a town like Seattle and spread them to other communities around the country and around the world. This approach to activating these networks this way and thinking about network localism is really going to be, I think, the hallmark of our times in civic life right now. If you think about this first image, these are images of folks celebrating the conclusion of the Paris Climate Agreement. And you can say, well, that's old news because the current administration has said that they're not going to abide by the Paris Climate Agreement. But that's not the end of the story. The reality is that cities, localities, counties, states, even corporations all around the world are saying even if certain countries like the United States choose not to abide officially by the Paris Accords, we are going to create networks of local actors who are going to web up and commit themselves in this archipelago of power to actually live up to the standards of the Paris Agreements. That kind of approach of network localism is being applied not just to climate change, it's being applied to all kinds of social issues right now. Again, on gun responsibility, on wages and worker power, and all these approaches where national governments are stalled or stuck or unwilling to move for various reasons, localities are webbing up in a way that is completely changing the game. Another example of this, which is just in an organizational scale, is an organization called FII, the Family Independence Initiative. And this is an organization that started in the Bay Area many years ago, and it's now spread around the United States, and its method is very simple. It takes poor people in some of our hardest hit communities in the United States, and it says, these are not clients to be served. These are assets. These are people with wisdom, knowledge, relationships, and capital. Maybe not a lot of money capital, but social capital. And if you empower them with just a small grant to start solving their own problems and start inviting them to learn the structures of mutual aid and self-organizing in circles of support, they can solve their own problems in ways that welfare states are not actually so efficient or skilled at. And so FII has had this approach to empowering the poor in the United States that itself has gone viral. And so the lessons learned from FII in Oakland have now spread to FII in New Orleans and FII in Philadelphia and Detroit, and all the ways in which data and lessons and methods are being shared across this network, this web of local actors, is emblematic of the way that we can, in these times now, activate networks to act exponentially. So now let's take a look at how this strategy of acting exponentially plays out here at home. We're going to take a deep dive and a close look at Real Change, the street newspaper here in Seattle, and see how folks part of the ecosystem and network of Real Change act exponentially.
9906, Greg. Let's get her done.
Get her done. If you're happy and you know it, buy a paper. If you're happy and you know it, and you really want to show it. If you're happy and you know it, buy a paper. There you are. Ladies and gentlemen, $2 for the paper. Homeless people's newspaper.
My name is Tim Harris, and I'm the founding director of Real Change. When I arrived here, I didn't know anybody. And the first meeting I went to was one of the Coalition on Homelessness. And I saw who was there and took down names and started thinking about who I should talk to. I think the most important steps in getting this paper off the ground and growing the network that supports this paper was that came from the community with community involvement and community input.
$2 for the paper, folks. Have a good day, guys.
I think the next thing was being serious about involving the vendors. The vendors are the hub of our community relationships.
Will change, sir?
Next day.
You have a nice day.
When we first started selling the paper, people would usually shy from us. Women would grab their purses, think that we're going to rob them or something like that. And eventually, the paper started going out, started spreading out, and people started getting to trust us. Plus, we do protests. We go to meetings at city halls trying to change the law to help people that don't have a voice have a voice and stand up for themselves.
Right now, the International Network of Street Papers has about 100 member papers across 36 countries.
Besides selling Real Change, I'm promoting community.
You know, any given month, we've got more than 300 vendors that are out there selling the paper, and each one of them has their own network of people who support them and have come to know them.
He's awesome, and his cause is awesome.
I'm one of his regulars.
You want to buy one, lady?
Oh, of course.
Years people give me food. They stop me out of their franchise and goes, hey, the guy ordered a sandwich, but he didn't come back. Boom. You know, I never have to worry about food when I go downtown, nothing. And then this paper is all over the world, and I'm a part of that. I'm a part of that. Even over there in Australia where they sell papers, street papers, I'm a part of that.
More than 60% of our budget comes from individual donations. We've grown into an organization that has a $1.2 million annual budget, 15 full-time staff, weekly publication of about 12,000 issues.
I feel like I'm now a part of society all over again, even though I do have a traumatic brain injury.
People started buying my paper every week. They didn't care whether I was high, they didn't care where I come from, what I look like, nothing.
After time of being in this community and coming to see themselves as somebody of value, their sense of who they are no longer squares with past dysfunctional behaviors, and they become ready to move on from that and be somebody else.
Hey, brother.
I stopped smoking crack when I met this paper.
I do have a paper that will help homeless people change their lives.
All of those vendors, as I've said, are in community with their readers, and their readers want to support their vendors, and by extension, they want to support our work.
Now to talk to us some more about how to generate exponential power, we're joined by Tamara Power-Drudas. She's the Chief of Staff at Amplifier. Tamara, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us what Amplifier is. I think a lot of people, when you describe it, will be like, oh yeah, but tell us what the organization is and does.
Yeah, so Amplifier is a nonprofit design lab, and we amplify the voices of social change movements. So we team up with community-based partners, and we design visuals and tactics that help them galvanize their core supporters, that bring people in off the sidelines that want to take action but don't yet know how, or those that disagree, and inviting them to the table.
So among the more famous, I guess, set of visual content that you all created was around the inauguration, right? Describe some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Amplifier teamed up with Shepard Fairey and Ernesto Urena and Jessica Sabagal, all incredible artists, to create imagery that would push back on some of the hate and intolerance and bigotry that were so common during the presidential campaign. And those visuals were distributed throughout the inauguration through centerfold ads taken out in several national publications, but were also distributed on placards throughout DC and through the Women's March on Washington the following weekend.
And they typically said on the bottom what?
They said, "We the people are greater than fear, we defend dignity, and we protect each other."
Mm-hmm. So those images became truly iconic during the Women's March and other mass protests in the wake of the inauguration. And that really gave people one picture of what Amplifier does, but it's not just about the art itself, right? I mean, you all work to activate different networks of both artists and activists in different places at once. Describe your method, your whole theory of action.
Yeah, so Amplifier uses design thinking methodology throughout all of our processes, and so that's very much a human-centric design. Rather than having a group of people behind closed doors that aren't connected to the folks that are most impacted by an issue, we bring together key stakeholders, key partners, community leaders, cultural leaders into a room and do a facilitated dialogue that's forward-looking, that's action-oriented, and that's hopeful about what we're working toward. And so those prompts and those ideas are then filtered through our artistic lens, and we identify artists that have a perspective that adds to that issue area, whether that's women's rights, criminal justice reform, environmental justice, anywhere in between. And then they create visuals that then are distributed through either technology, through print, through posters, through stickers, whatever the activation might be for that particular movement.
So that pivot point you describe of filtering through the artistic lens, that's a pretty important one there. And how, when you're working with artists to take the concepts of a given cause, say criminal justice reform, how do they translate those concepts into visual memes and formats that they know will have viral networked life?
Yeah, well, there's a piece of prototyping and iteration that's part of design thinking. So the knowledge that we're not going to capture an entire message or an entire counter message in one image, but that it will be through a series of art that helps us have conversations that sometimes are too difficult or too uncomfortable to have outright. Art can be that accessible entry point. So the artists that we work with sometimes are coming from within movements and sometimes are very active within them, but sometimes they're artists that haven't yet been activated or haven't been a part of a social change movement yet. And so applying either a perspective from deep within, roots within that community, or applying an outside lens that helps consider how those that haven't tapped into that issue might think about it, I think gives a little bit more accessible entry point.
So in this whole design thinking approach to activating these kinds of networks, artists are, of course, one central node of the whole process. Who else are nodes in the network that once you've created a visual on a given cause that you want to disseminate, how do you all think about nodes, either around a geography or a demography, for spreading that content?
There are national nodes, so we think about national media as a key node of that. We think about national networks of activism. So Create Justice is a network nationally that was created around juvenile justice reform. And so that's a good example of folks that are working on a very local level throughout their communities, coming together on a national scale several times a year to coordinate action and to talk about the issue areas and to consider different ways of breaking down some of the barriers or stereotypes.
What's the name of that network?
Create Justice.
Create Justice. So you'll work with Create Justice and you'll say, okay, we've got a possible menu of these visuals to help you change the story or the equation around this issue. and then they'll do what? What like, kind of put me in that situation.
Yeah, so I think a really relevant example this week is the No Muslim Ban Ever protests that are happening across the United States. And we had that in Seattle this weekend at Westlake Park, and it's happening at DC out in front of the White House on the 18th. And so in this case, we worked with around 30 Muslim activists around the United States and paired them up with artist Molly Crabapple to create images that push back on anti-Muslim bigotry. And so they're reshaping the narrative that we're telling about who Muslims in America are today and trying to galvanize people that aren't opposed to Muslims being here, but haven't yet taken that step toward action. And so in that case, we developed ideas and imagery and prompts throughout that network, and Molly translated that into imagery paired up with models that had identities that were somehow counter to what the mainstream story of Muslims in America is today.
And so when you've created imagery like this, and it spreads through a network like this, when it relocalizes in a given network, say in Seattle or in Tacoma or whatever, how much latitude is there for local activists then to sort of repurpose or rejigger the image or the content that you all have fed out to the network to tailor it even more to local circumstances?
Amplifier is an invitation to use the art. So we give all of our art away for free. You can download it as high-resolution downloads. You can put it on prints. You can put it on clothing. You can drop it out of airplanes. You can do whatever you want with the art. And I think what's so impactful about it is that people are making these images what they want them to be. They're making unifying messages, but they mean something different to everyone that sees them. And so we have a design lab here in the heart of Seattle in Pioneer Square at the Impact Hub, and that's a place where we're able to test out some of these messages and have people interact with the art and tell their stories of what it means to them.
Now, you've said something, though, kind of to many people, especially, I mean, both activists and content creators might seem like, whoa, what do you mean? You're just giving it away? But that is sort of the key to this spreading virally, right? I mean, if you had actually put a lot of intellectual property rights around it and said you can only use it under these circumstances, these images probably would not have spread as rapidly as they did.
True, very true. We made it a priority, and we continue to make it a priority, that all of the art should be free. It should be democratized. It should be something that any movement, any activist, any individual that wants to take action on an issue and that finds meaning and connection in that art can take it and use it to better tell their story. So we've very much had a one worldview that a lot of our stories are told through about who we are as a country, about what we care about, what our values are, what matters, who we should fear, who we should love. And I think art and the way that Amplifier distributes it freely gives people a new way to tell those stories. So instead of just defaulting to the story that's being told, they can pick up art and say, no, this is my story and this is what it means to me.
So last question for you quickly is, what about in the other direction? To what extent yet are people out in the world coming up with images and ideas? They're not part of Amplifier yet or at all. And they maybe send ideas your way and they say, hey, I've got a killer idea for an icon or an image or a visual or something that should be used on given issue X or Y or Z. Can you invite or harvest those?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We do open calls several times a year. So we have artists that are central to the Amplifier work. So Ernesto Urena has done several campaigns with us, and we keep coming back to those artists to build upon their body of work with Amplifier. But the open calls are a really exciting opportunity to amplify new artists and emerging artists that also have phenomenal ideas for ways to break through some of those barriers around storytelling. So we did an open call for the Women's March on Washington that received over 5,000 submissions from female identifying artists. And those really were key to creating those unifying messages for the march as well. So 4 million people carried artists, artwork from 5,000 artists that really allowed them to tie into kind of, here are our central messages as a movement. Here are the key things that we're looking for.
Wow. Well, the organization is called Amplifier, amplifier.org. And Tamara, this is just such a great classic case study of exponential power, and one that actually activates both the head and the heart using art this way. So thank you for coming in to tell us about it.
Thanks for having me.
Tamara Power-Drudas is Chief of Staff at Amplifier, and you can find out more about the organization at amplifier.org. So remember, the strategy of power we're talking about today is acting exponentially. And that means remembering that in a networked age, you can generate power not incrementally, but truly virally and exponentially. And what does that mean, to act exponentially? Well, again, it means setting off contagions, thinking about crafting memes and images that go viral or have the potential to go viral. It means activating nodes of networks, reading that network map to think, who are the people or what are the institutions or the points in this network that if you infect them, you can really make this thing spread. And then finally, it means stitching networks of networks together and having this approach of thinking about acting locally, but webbing up your local action into a global network of local actors. That kind of work, which when you think about the way that we draw and make networks, and you think about the ways in which we web up and we connect to each other, you know, one of the realities of network life is that there's no guarantees that any of this stuff is actually going to spread. But it's only through practice and only through the kind of repeated work of generating these kinds of memes, contagions, nodes, and networks that you'll get to be skillful at acting exponentially. Well, in every episode, we like to take questions from you, the viewers, for our social media segment. So we've got a couple here that we'd like to speak to. So the first one comes from Candace on Facebook, and it's a pretty powerful one. How do we go about overthrowing the government and getting rid of year after year political leaders? I have a very simple answer. Vote. Vote. Voting is the most easy means at our disposal for effecting a peaceful overnight revolution, and yet most of us, most of the time, throw away that power. Voting is something that we've got to reclaim. The second question comes from Gail on Facebook, and this is a deep question too. What is the best question I can ask my Trump-supporting friends and family to generate an authentic rather than defensive conversation? And by the way, if you are a Trump supporter, then just replace Trump supporting to Trump opposing here. But I think the deeper answer is this. You can't go straight to issues. You can't say, come on, let's sit down and talk about healthcare or guns or whatever it is. You've got to spend and invest the time actually unpacking what it is that motivates this other person, where it is and how it is that they come to the values that they've got. And so saying, let's have a conversation about something as simple as who's influenced you? Who's shaped your values and your norms and your worldview? How do you feel like you pass it on? Questions like that that are universal, that kind of unlock the human heart, that help you see, okay, I understand why this person is motivated by this particular desire or hope or fear, whatever it might be, rehumanizes the conversation. You may later on still disagree about guns or healthcare or whatever it is, but first you have to lay that foundation of rehumanization. This is the work we've all got to do right now, not because we're not going to disagree, we are, but so that we can disagree better and with a deeper sense of humanity. Well, we hope that you'll keep on sending your questions to us, and anytime you can reach us through social media, through this hashtag on Facebook, and also through old-fashioned email here. We love to hear from you. Well, that wraps this episode of Citizen University TV, and we hope that you'll continue to process and think about the stories we've told and the strategies we've described here, and think about how you, in your everyday life, can practice power and today, act exponentially. I'm Eric Liu. Thanks for joining us.